The alien council chamber was a masterpiece of sterile efficiency. Sleek silver walls hummed faintly with the energy of 1,000 interconnected systems, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. Seated around an obsidian table were the Scarans, tall, pale beings with elongated skulls and unnerving violet eyes that radiated disdain for disorder. Their leader, High Chancellor Zoth, folded her thin hands and leaned forward. "Ambassador, explain why humanity has introduced a galactic catastrophe in the form of a small terrestrial quadruped." The human ambassador, Commander Eli Vance, leaned back in his chair with an air of sheepish confidence. He was the kind of man who had seen too much and slept too little, his rumpled uniform looking like it had fought a battle with an ironing board and lost. Still, he flashed a wry grin. "I see you've heard about Mittens." A collective shudder passed through the Scarans. One of the younger council members whispered something, and the words rippled around the table. "The Destroyer." Eli rubbed his temple. "I'm going to need to tell you the whole story. And just so we're clear, none of this was on purpose. The story began 3 Earth weeks ago when Dr. Felicity Hayes, humanity's leading xenobotanist, was invited to Skaran 9 for a cultural exchange. Dr. Hayes was brilliant, meticulous, and, unfortunately, completely smitten with her pet cat, Mittens. Eli remembered the little furball well. Black and white with bright green eyes, Mittens had all the charm of a seasoned con artist. "Please don't bring the cat," Eli had advised Felicity before the mission. "But he hates being left alone." Felicity had protested, clutching Mittens like a beloved heirloom. Eli should have insisted, but Felicity was stubborn, and the transport ship's security scanners didn't flag domestic felines as contraband. Thus, Mittens arrived on Skaran 9 in a lavender pet carrier, blissfully unaware of the havoc he would soon wreak. The Scarans, a hyper-rational species, prided themselves on the precision of their civilization. Cities were laid out in geometric perfection. Their laws were so comprehensive that even jaywalking had a 60-page regulation. They didn't just control their environment, they dominated it. Nothing happened on Skaran 9 that wasn't scheduled, cataloged, and triple verified. They believed chaos was the root of all evil. This worldview was tested the moment Mittens escaped. It happened during a ceremonial welcome. Dr. Hayes had been standing on a podium, delivering a speech about scientific cooperation, when Mittens, who had been cleverly disguised as essential scientific equipment to get past customs, poked his head out of the carrier. Spotting a moving beam of light from a nearby hovering drone, Mittens did what cats have done since time immemorial. He leapt. Several things happened at once. The beam of light was part of a delicate sensor array linked to the planet's central database. When Mittens pounced, the drone jerked upward to compensate, inadvertently causing a cascade of errors. Streetlights flickered. Traffic guidance systems faltered. The Scarans, unaccustomed to anything unexpected, froze in the streets. Meanwhile, Mittens, blissfully ignorant, chased the light until he collided with a ceremonial Skaran artifact, a crystalline obelisk that housed their planetary weather controls. The obelisk tipped. The crowd gasped. And then, to everyone's horror, it shattered into 1,000 irreplaceable pieces. High Chancellor Zoth's thin face was unreadable, but Eli had the distinct impression that if Scarans could blush, she'd be the color of molten lava. That, she said through clenched teeth, was a sacred relic. Dr. Hayes, frantic, tried to corral Mittens. But the cat, now overstimulated by the shouts and flashing lights, darted into the nearest ventilation duct. A clanging sound echoed as he disappeared into the city's underground infrastructure. "Mittens!" Felicity shouted. "Come back!" Eli returned to the present, eyeing the council members warily. "You have to understand something about cats. They're independent contractors. They don't follow orders, and they certainly don't grasp the concept of sacred relics. Or planetary sabotage," High Chancellor Zoth interjected icily. "Right? That too." From there, the situation deteriorated with startling speed. Mittens' exploration of the Skaran underground led to a series of unfortunate chain reactions. In one sector, he knocked over a series of data nodes, causing entire libraries of historical records to corrupt. In another, he discovered a high-tech heating coil and decided it was the perfect spot for a nap, which short-circuited the city's energy grid. The Skaran response was swift and ill-fated. They dispatched a squad of automated drones programmed to capture intruders. Unfortunately, their programming did not account for the unique agility and unpredictability of felines. Mittens evaded every trap with the grace of a ninja and the recklessness of a drunk tightrope walker. One particularly memorable moment involved Mittens stumbling into a restricted area where the Scarans stored their experimental terraforming equipment. Somehow, the cat managed to trigger a dormant volcanic simulation that caused minor tremors across the capital. The chaos reached its peak when Mittens emerged onto the roof of the Skaran government building. From his perch, he surveyed the city as if he were a tiny emperor overseeing his conquered domain. The drones swarmed like angry bees, but Mittens leapt from ledge to ledge, narrowly avoiding capture. Finally, with a triumphant yowl, he launched himself onto a Skaran defense console, accidentally activating a planetary distress beacon. Back in the council chamber, Eli tried to soften the blow. Look, in our defense, humans aren't great at predicting what cats will do. They're forces of nature. High Chancellor Zoth pressed her fingers to her temples. And yet you unleashed this force upon us. Unleashed is a strong word. We are still cleaning up the rubble. Eli shrugged helplessly. You're not the first civilization Mittens has confused. Probably won't be the last. The Scarans exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one council member, who had remained silent until now, spoke in a trembling voice. Tell us, Ambassador, is there any chance more of these creatures exist? Eli paused. His mouth twitched with a suppressed smile. Counselors, you may want to sit down for this next part. And just like that, every Skaran in the room reached for their chairs. The chaos began with a meow. Somewhere beneath the gleaming streets of Skaran 9, Mittens had found his way into an underground chamber that pulsed with energy. The room was filled with delicate control panels covered in Skaran symbols. Symbols that would have screamed, "Do not touch," to any rational being. Unfortunately, cats aren't known for respecting boundaries. Mittens padded across the room, tail high and curious. A single paw landed on a console, and the city's lighting system promptly dimmed. Another paw pressed a glowing panel, and a siren began to wail in the distance. The Scarans, rigid and orderly by nature, were programmed to panic at even the mildest deviation from protocol. Within minutes, entire sectors had frozen. Traffic stopped. Doors locked. Automated emergency systems kicked into action, announcing a citywide state of emergency. Above ground, the Skaran population devolved into chaos. Citizens scrambled to decipher the emergency announcements, which were now broadcasting overlapping, contradictory messages thanks to Mittens' unwitting interference. The alien equivalent of street vendors abandoned their stands, spilling strange purple fruits onto the ground. Hovering transport vehicles swerved into one another, creating a symphony of metallic screeches. High Chancellor Zoth was overseeing damage control from the Central Command Center when the first security drone reported back. Its footage displayed a fuzzy, black and white cat nonchalantly pressing buttons with its paws. Zoth's thin lips twitched. That is the creature? Yes, High Chancellor, confirmed one of her aides, who looked as though he might pass out from the stress. Send more drones, Zoth ordered, narrowing her violet eyes. Bring it to me. Alive. The drones descended into the tunnels with the precision of a military strike force. Unfortunately, they had underestimated Mittens. The cat, sensing he was being hunted, darted through the labyrinth of tunnels with an agility that defied logic. He squeezed through ventilation grates too narrow for drones, leapt over tripwires with casual ease, and even paused to swat at a hovering surveillance camera just for fun. When the drones finally cornered him, near the city's geothermal plant, Mittens' instincts kicked in. He arched his back, hissed, and darted into the nearest vent. The drones surged forward in pursuit, but the vent was too narrow for their programming to adjust. The first drone wedged itself firmly in the opening. The second crashed into the back of the first. By the time the fifth drone arrived, the entire line had formed an unintentional blockade. Sparks flew, and one of the drones emitted a pitiful beep before shutting down completely. Meanwhile, Mittens emerged on the other side of the plant, blissfully unaware of the destruction he'd caused. He sniffed the air, spotted something shiny, and chased it with a joyful pounce. Back in the command center, Zoth was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "What is the status of the geothermal plant?" she demanded. "The cooling systems are failing," reported a technician with trembling fingers. "We're detecting a buildup of pressure in the core." "How long until critical failure?" "Approximately 3 minutes." Zoth's fingers drummed against the console. "Evacuate the area. Divert all energy to the containment fields." In the city square, Eli Vance had just finished explaining to Dr. Felicity Hayes that her beloved pet had inadvertently triggered a planetary state of emergency. Felicity looked pale but resolute. "I'm going after him." "Felicity, wait," Eli began, but it was too late. She had already darted into the nearest underground access tunnel, clutching a bag of cat treats like her life depended on it. Mittens, for his part, had found a cozy nook atop a warm control panel and decided it was nap time. Unfortunately, the control panel in question was linked to the Skaran planetary defense system, a network of automated satellites designed to intercept potential invaders. With one sleepy roll, Mittens shifted his weight onto a particularly sensitive touchpad. The satellites woke up. Above the planet, the defense grid activated with an ominous hum. Targeting lasers scanned the atmosphere for threats, but without any actual invaders to target, the system defaulted to firing at random debris in orbit. The results were spectacular. Meteorological stations exploded in bursts of light, sending showers of debris hurtling back toward the planet's surface. The Skaran news networks, which prided themselves on calm, measured reporting, devolved into hysteria. Broadcasts flashed with headlines like "Unprecedented Disaster" and "Feline Menace Continues to Terrorize Capital." In the tunnels, Felicity sprinted through darkness, guided by the sound of distant alarms. She rounded a corner and spotted Mittens just as he was stretching lazily atop the defense console. Relief flooded her. "Mittens! Come here, baby!" Mittens blinked sleepily, then hopped off the console and trotted toward her with the smug satisfaction of a creature who believed he had conquered the world. Felicity scooped him up, clutching him to her chest like a lost child. By the time Felicity and Mittens emerged above ground, the city was in shambles. Smoke rose from distant buildings. Emergency lights flashed in every direction. The Skarans were either fleeing or frozen in existential dread. Eli, who had taken refuge behind an overturned vendor cart, waved them over. "Felicity, thank God. Tell me you've got the little menace." "I've got him." Felicity held up Mittens like a trophy. The cat, oblivious to the destruction around him, purred contentedly. High Chancellor Zoth arrived moments later, flanked by a squad of heavily armed Skaran guards. Her eyes locked onto Mittens with a mixture of fury and terror. "That creature has single-handedly destabilized our civilization." Eli stepped forward, raising his hands in a diplomatic gesture. "Look, I know this looks bad." "It is bad," Zoth snapped. "Our defense grid is firing at the sky, our geothermal plant is in meltdown, and half the city is under martial law. Your species will pay for this." "Fair. Very fair." Eli scratched the back of his neck. "But in our defense, you did let the cat in." Zoth's expression darkened. "Remove that thing from our planet." Immediately. Felicity, still clutching Mittens, nodded vigorously. Happily, as the humans prepared for their swift departure, Mittens let out a final, satisfied meow. The sound echoed across the ruined city like the triumphant cry of a tiny conqueror. And though no one said it out loud, one thought hung heavy in the air. The worst was not over yet. The departure from Skaran 9 was nothing short of chaotic. Commander Eli Vance, Dr. Felicity Hayes, and Mittens were ushered onto their transport ship with all the ceremony of unwanted guests being thrown out of a party. If that party had been interrupted by a series of natural disasters, catastrophic malfunctions, and one very smug feline. As the ship's engines roared to life, High Chancellor Zoth stood on the landing platform, her expression a cocktail of fury and exhaustion. The last thing she saw before the hatch closed was Mittens sitting contentedly in Felicity's arms, licking one paw with the nonchalance of a seasoned troublemaker. Once they were safely in orbit, Eli slumped into the co-pilot's seat, exhaling a long, weary sigh. Well, that could have gone worse. Felicity shot him a look. Could it? We made it out alive, Eli pointed out. I'm calling that a win. Mittens, apparently satisfied with his work, curled up on Felicity's lap and began to purr like an industrial generator. Felicity absent-mindedly stroked his fur, though her eyes were distant. I still don't understand how he caused so much damage. He's just a cat. Eli leaned back, folding his arms behind his head. Cats are agents of chaos, Felicity. It's their whole brand. You bring one into a civilization that thrives on order, and boom, instant disaster. It's more than that, though. Felicity's brow furrowed. Mittens isn't normally this destructive. Before Eli could respond, the ship's communication panel lit up with an incoming transmission. The Skaran emblem flashed on screen, and a familiar, stern face appeared. High Chancellor Zoth glared at them through the hollow feed. Her violet eyes narrowed to slits. Ambassador Vance. Dr. Hayes. High Chancellor. Eli greeted with forced cheerfulness. What an unexpected pleasure. I am contacting you not to exchange pleasantries, Zoth said coldly. Our scientists have reviewed the data from the incidents your creature caused. There is something you need to see. The screen split to display a series of Skaran surveillance recordings, each highlighting Mittens' escapades. At first, it looked like a simple comedy reel. Mittens knocking over drones, short-circuiting panels, and sending Skarans into hysterics. But as the footage continued, something strange became apparent. Wherever Mittens stepped, a faint ripple of energy followed. The panels didn't just malfunction. They overloaded as if responding to some unknown force. The geothermal plant didn't just overheat. It destabilized in response to Mittens' very presence. Felicity leaned forward, eyes wide. That's not normal. No, Zoth agreed grimly. Our preliminary analysis suggests that your cat emits a unique bioelectromagnetic field unlike anything we have encountered. This field appears to interfere with Skaran technology on a fundamental level. Eli rubbed his temples. You're telling me Mittens is a walking EMP? Not exactly, Zoth said. It is more complex than simple electromagnetic interference. It is as if your creature's field introduces randomness. Chaos. That tracks, Eli muttered. Felicity was still staring at the footage. But why would Mittens have a field like that? He's just a house cat. Zoth hesitated. Your species has a long history of domesticating animals. Have you ever considered the possibility that some of these creatures have evolved alongside your technology in ways you do not fully understand? Eli raised an eyebrow. Are you saying cats have secret superpowers? Not intentionally, Zoth said. But it is possible that, over millennia, certain species have developed traits that disrupt or manipulate artificial systems. On Earth, this might manifest as a minor inconvenience, a knocked-over vase or a broken lamp. On Skaran 9, where our technology is far more sensitive, it manifested as planetary chaos. Felicity hugged Mittens a little tighter. So it's not his fault? Fault is irrelevant, Zoth snapped. The fact remains that your species has bred a living chaos generator, and you brought it to our world. Well, when you put it like that, Eli trailed off, then shrugged. Yeah, okay, that sounds bad. Zoth's expression softened, if only slightly. Despite the destruction, there is something to be learned here. Your creature has exposed vulnerabilities in our systems we would never have discovered otherwise. Felicity blinked. You're saying Mittens did you a favor? Do not mistake this for gratitude, Zoth said quickly. But yes, in a twisted, chaotic way, we are better prepared for future disruptions because of him. There was a long pause. Then Eli grinned. So what you're saying is Mittens is a hero? Zoth's glare returned full force. Do not push your luck, Ambassador. Felicity chuckled despite herself. I guess we'll be keeping a closer eye on him from now on. See that you do, Zoth said. And if I hear of this creature returning to any Skaran territory, there will be consequences. With that, the transmission ended. Eli leaned back in his seat, still grinning. Well, Felicity, It seems Mittens has made interstellar history. Great, Felicity said dryly. Now I just have to explain to everyone back home why my cat is a galactic menace. Mittens, still purring, opened one eye as if to say, "You're welcome." As the ship sailed through the void, leaving Skaran 9 far behind, Eli couldn't help but laugh. Chaos had been unleashed, lessons had been learned, and somehow, against all odds, they'd come out the other side intact. Mittens, Emperor of Mayhem, had claimed his place in the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same.